Ever found yourself staring at your phone, overwhelmed by a flood of notifications, deadlines piling up, and the world around you feeling like it's spinning just a little too fast? That moment when chaos seems to seep into every corner of life, it's not just a modern problem. 2,000 years ago, one of the most powerful men in history, Marcus Aurelius, sat down each night to write in his journal, grappling with the same feelings of uncertainty and disorder. His words, preserved in Meditations, weren't just philosophical musings, they were survival tools for a mind under siege by the chaos of ruling an empire on the brink of war, plague, and political intrigue. And here's the surprising truth. Those ancient pages hold secrets that can help us navigate our own storms today. Picture this. It's the year 170, and Rome is in turmoil. Marcus, the emperor, faces rebellions, the loss of loved ones, and the weight of countless decisions that could alter the course of history. Yet, in the quiet of his tent, he writes, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. That simple idea, focusing on what's within our control, became his anchor, and it wasn't just him. Stoic philosophers like Epictetus and Seneca kept journals too, turning their private struggles into timeless lessons on resilience. Their notebooks weren't filled with grand theories. They were raw, practical, and deeply human, a blueprint for finding calm when the world feels anything but calm. So what can these ancient journals teach us about control in chaos? That's exactly what we're diving into today. We'll explore the actual entries of Stoic thinkers, uncover the principles they used to steady themselves, and most importantly, see how to apply those same strategies in our lives. Because whether it's a hectic work week, a personal crisis, or just the noise of everyday life, the Stoics believed chaos wasn't something to fear. It was an opportunity to practice clarity, courage, and focus. And their journals, they're proof that even in the messiest moments, we can choose where to direct our attention. So if you've ever wished for a little more calm in the storm, stick around. This isn't just history, it's a toolkit for living. For the Stoics, journaling wasn't just a habit, it was a way of turning life's chaos into clarity. Think of it like this. While we might scroll through social media to distract ourselves from stress, Marcus Aurelius picked up a pen to confront his thoughts head-on. His Meditations was never meant to be read by anyone else. It was a private space to wrestle with doubts, frustrations, and the weight of leadership, line by line. And that's what made it powerful. Unlike today's curated posts designed for likes, Stoic journals were raw, unfiltered conversations with the self, a practice Seneca called daily surgery. He wrote, "The mind must be given time each day to settle back into itself." Imagine that, not just reacting to the world, but carving out quiet moments to ask, what did I control today? Where did I let chaos take the wheel? Here's the twist. Modern life often trains us to do the opposite. We document our lives for an audience, turning reflection into performance. But the Stoics knew real strength came from honesty, not applause. When Marcus wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one," he wasn't preaching, he was reminding himself. His journal was where he practiced what he preached, where he could stumble, question, and recommit without judgment. That's the heart of Stoic journaling, a tool to separate the noise from what truly matters. So how do we bridge that gap? Start by asking one question at the end of each day. What's one thing I could have handled better? Not to dwell on mistakes, but to spot patterns, moments where emotions overruled reason, or where we blamed circumstances instead of owning our responses. Because here's the secret the Stoics understood: chaos doesn't disappear, but with a pen and a little honesty, we can stop being swept away by it and start steering. Chaos wasn't the enemy to the Stoics, it was the teacher. Epictetus, born a slave and facing hardships most of us can't fathom, put it bluntly, difficulties show what men are. In other words, chaos doesn't break us, it reveals us. Think of it like a gym for the mind. You wouldn't expect to build strength without lifting weights, right? In the same way, life's messiest moments are where we develop resilience, patience, and clarity. Marcus Aurelius knew this firsthand. One journal entry, written during a grueling military campaign, captures it perfectly. The obstacle in the path becomes the path. Never forget that within every hurdle is the chance to grow stronger. He didn't curse the chaos of war, he used it to refine his character. Now, consider your own life. Maybe it was a project that fell apart at work, a sudden illness, or a relationship that tested your patience. In that moment, what did you learn about yourself? The Stoics would say those aren't just setbacks, they're invitations to practice virtue. When traffic steals your calm, that's your chance to practice patience. When plans crumble, that's your moment to adapt with courage. Even small frustrations, like a spilled coffee or a missed deadline, are tiny classrooms where we can train our minds to respond, not react. Here's the key shift. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" the Stoics asked, "What is this teaching me?" Marcus's journals are filled with that exact reframe. On days when politics exhausted him or grief weighed heavy, he wrote not to complain but to uncover the lesson. One entry reads, "Today I met interference, ingratitude, and noise. But I also met my own capacity to choose kindness, focus, and perseverance." That's the Stoic secret. Chaos doesn't define you. It shows you where you still have room to grow. So next time life feels like it's spinning out of control, try this. Pause, take a breath, and ask, if this were my teacher, what would it want me to learn? Because the storms outside will always come and go, but the strength you build by facing them, that stays with you long after the clouds clear. Epictetus, the former slave turned philosopher, had a blunt yet liberating message. Some things are up to us and some things are not. That simple division, the dichotomy of control, was the Stoic's compass in chaos. Picture him in a crowded Roman marketplace, jostled by strangers, surrounded by noise, yet writing in his journal, "I cannot control the crowd, but I can control my irritation. I cannot silence the street, but I can choose where to focus my thoughts." His words weren't passive surrender, they were a deliberate redirecting of energy. While we might obsess over flight delays, rude comments, or the weather, Epictetus would ask, does fretting change the outcome, or does it just drain the focus you could have spent on what you can influence? Fast forward to today. How often do we exhaust ourselves trying to manage the unmanageable? Refreshing our inbox for a reply that won't come, agonizing over a friend's choices, or scrolling through news cycles that only fuel helplessness. The Stoics recognized this trap centuries ago. One journal entry from an unknown disciple captures it perfectly. "Today, I wasted 3 hours worrying about a storm that never came. Time I could have spent preparing shelter or comforting my family." The lesson: chaos multiplies when we confuse influence with control. Here's where the practice gets practical. Grab a notebook and draw 2 columns, within my control and beyond my control. In the first, list things like your effort, your attitude, your boundaries. In the second, jot down external events, others' opinions, even the past. The act of writing does something profound. It shifts chaos from a swirling fog into clear categories. You'll likely notice how much mental space is hijacked by column 2. That's the Stoic wake-up call. We can't stop storms, but we can learn to dance in the rain. So here's a question to sit with. What chaos are you trying to command that isn't yours to conquer? Traffic jams, societal expectations, the mood of a coworker. Each time we grip too tightly to what's outside our hands, we loosen our hold on what we can shape, our next move. Epictetus put it best: we suffer not from the events themselves, but from our judgments about them. The journal then becomes a mirror, revealing where we've handed over our peace to things that were never ours to own. Amor Fati, love of fate, sounds like a lofty ideal until you realize it was forged in the grit of real struggle. Centuries before Nietzsche called it my formula for greatness, the Stoics were living it. Picture Seneca, exiled to a barren island, writing not with bitterness but with resolve. This place that you call exile is home to me. He didn't just endure his fate, he embraced it, turning isolation into a space for study and writing. That's the heart of amor fati, not passive acceptance, but active engagement with whatever life throws at you. Marcus Aurelius put it plainly: the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Now fast forward to modern chaos. A job loss, a diagnosis, a missed opportunity. These aren't just setbacks. They are forks in the road where we choose between resistance and reinvention. Take a page from Epictetus's journal where he recounts a broken lamp. Instead of cursing the thief who stole it, I'm grateful for a reminder possessions are fleeting, but my ability to adapt is not. That shift from victimhood to ownership is the alchemy of amor fati. Here's the challenge: think of one chaotic event in your life right now. Maybe it's a financial strain, a relationship tension, or even a daily irritation like traffic. What if, instead of wrestling against it, you asked, how could this unexpected twist be shaping me for something I can't yet see? Marcus wrote, accept what nature intends. It's not an insult, but a prescription. Your chaos isn't random, it's raw material. The job loss could free you to pivot toward a passion. The illness might slow you down to notice what truly matters. Even the spilled coffee, a nudge to practice patience. So grab your journal tonight and try this. Describe one unwanted event, then reframe it as a teacher. Not with toxic positivity, but with curiosity. What strength is this moment asking me to uncover? Because loving fate isn't about denying pain. It's about trusting your capacity to meet it, one page at a time. Premeditatio malorum, the Stoic practice of premeditation of evils, sounds grim until you realize it's actually a tool for liberation. Seneca, writing to his friend Lucilius, described it like mental fire drills. He robs present ills of their power who has perceived their coming in advance. Imagine him sitting in his lavish Roman villa, deliberately picturing himself stripped of wealth, status, even his freedom, not to wallow in fear, but to disarm it. By mentally rehearsing exile, he realized, this is what I feared, this is bearable. That's the paradox. Visualizing worst-case scenarios doesn't amplify anxiety, it deflates their shock value. Modern psychology backs this up. Emergency responders train for disasters not to dwell on doom, but to react with clarity when chaos hits. Fire drills don't create panic, they prevent it. The Stoics took this further, applying it to everyday life. What if your business fails? What if the diagnosis is bad? By confronting these what-ifs in the safe space of their journals, they forged an unshakable resilience. Marcus Aurelius practiced this daily, writing, when you wake up, tell yourself, today I'll meet interference, ingratitude, and arrogance, but none of these things can injure me. He wasn't being morbid, he was inoculating himself against surprise. Here's where modern minds often trip. We confuse preparedness with pessimism. The Stoics weren't suggesting you obsess over disasters or live in constant dread. Their journals show the balance: acknowledge life's uncertainties, then focus on your power to respond. Seneca put it sharply, The man who has anticipated the coming of troubles takes away their power when they arrive. Think of it like packing an umbrella. You don't stare at the sky waiting for rain, but you're ready when it comes. Try this tonight. Pick one fear gnawing at you, a job loss, a health scare, a relationship rift. Write it down, then ask, if this happened, what's the first step I'd take? Not to dwell on the pain, but to spotlight your agency. Because chaos loses its fangs when you realize you've already walked through it in your mind. The Stoic journal wasn't a place for worry, it was a rehearsal space for courage, and the question isn't whether storms will come, it's whether you've practiced weathering them. In the year 165, as the Antonine plague swept through Rome, claiming thousands of lives each week, Marcus Aurelius faced a choice: succumb to despair or lead with clarity. His journal from that time reveals no grand proclamations, just quiet resolve. When you arise in the morning, he wrote, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love. This wasn't denial, it was defiance. While rumors spread that the plague was punishment from the gods, Marcus ordered state-funded funerals for the poor and opened imperial stores to feed the starving. His entries show a man balancing grim reality with unshaken duty. The art of living is more like wrestling than dancing because it requires standing firm amid unforeseen blows. Now contrast that with modern crises. When shelves emptied during recent global upheavals, panic buying revealed a different reflex, not communal care, but individual survival at any cost. Epictetus, who endured slavery and exile, would have recognized this tension. It's not what happens to you, but how you react that matters, he wrote. The Stoics didn't judge fear as weakness, they saw it as raw material for courage. Marcus's response to the plague wasn't about suppressing emotion, it was about channeling it into action. While others hoarded, he visited hospitals. While some blamed foreigners, he reminded himself in his journal, the best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. Here's what's striking: the Stoics didn't just endure chaos, they used it as a whetstone for character. When Marcus wrote, "What stands in the way becomes the way," during the plague's peak, he was modeling a radical idea. Crisis doesn't erase our choices, it reveals them. Today's tests might look different: social divisions, misinformation spirals, economic instability, but the core challenge remains. Do we retreat into self-interest or step forward with what Epictetus called endurance of the necessary? So consider this: when societal storms hit, whether a public health crisis, political turmoil, or environmental disaster, what's your instinct, to blame or to build? To hoard or to help? The Stoic journal wasn't a place for wishful thinking. It was a training ground for the moments when the world feels like it's fraying. And perhaps that's their most urgent lesson. Resilience isn't about avoiding the storm, but about remembering you're the one who gets to choose how to sail through it. Marcus Aurelius had a secret weapon against overwhelm, one he called the view from above. Picture him on a campaign in Germania, surrounded by the chaos of war, sitting in his tent and writing these words: think of the totality of all things and how small your troubles are in the grand sweep of time and space. He wasn't just philosophizing, he was practicing a mental shift that modern psychologists now call cognitive distancing. By imagining himself floating above the earth, watching armies move like ants and cities flicker like distant campfires, his personal struggles shrank to their true scale. What felt like a crushing responsibility as emperor became a single thread in the vast tapestry of history. Now apply that to your morning commute, stuck in traffic, running late, frustration boiling over. What if you pulled back the mental camera? From 1,000 feet up, that red sea of brake lights becomes a pulsing vein in the city's rhythm. From 10,000 feet, it's just a smudge on the landscape. And from space, it vanishes entirely. That's the power of perspective. The Stoics weren't dismissing real problems, they were putting them in context. As Marcus wrote, all things are swift to fade, becoming mere tales and soon forgotten. The meeting you're stressed about, the argument gnawing at you, how much will they matter in 5 years? In 50, here's how to make this ancient tool tangible. Tonight, try this exercise. Close your eyes and imagine your current worry as if you're observing it from your own future. Picture yourself a decade from now, looking back. What advice would that wiser, calmer version of you give? Maybe they'd chuckle at what once seemed earth-shattering, or gently remind you that the crisis became a turning point. Seneca practiced this when exiled, writing, "I imagined myself old, recounting this hardship as the moment I discovered my strength." The real magic happens when we realize that zooming out doesn't minimize our struggles, it maximizes our agency. That petty office conflict from cosmic altitude, it's a chance to practice grace. The project that feels life or death, a single brushstroke in the larger portrait of your growth. Marcus put it best, you are a little soul carrying a corpse, a blunt reminder that our bodies, our titles, even our empires are temporary, but the perspective we cultivate, that outlasts them all. So when chaos feels all-consuming, ask yourself, if I saw this moment framed against the backdrop of my whole life, would it still dominate the picture? Often, the answer unlocks a quiet courage, the kind that turns panic into patience and overwhelm into opportunity, because the stars don't fret over traffic jams, and neither should we. Stoic detachment might sound like cold indifference at first glance, but there's a crucial difference, one that changes everything. Picture Epictetus, the philosopher who endured slavery, writing in his journal after the death of a loved one, "I will not pretend this does not hurt, but I will not let the hurt command me." That's the heart of Stoic detachment, feeling deeply without being drowned by the waves of emotion. Modern culture often gives us two extremes, either suppress feelings with a stiff upper lip or drown in them endlessly. The Stoics offered a third path: acknowledge the pain, then choose how to carry it. Take Marcus Aurelius grieving the loss of his children while ruling an empire. His journal doesn't dismiss sorrow, it holds space for it. One entry reads, "Tears are natural, but surrender is not." Compare that to today's toxic positivity, where phrases like "just stay positive" can shame people for honest grief or frustration. The Stoics would have rejected that. Seneca wrote, "He who denies his fear only gives it more power." True detachment isn't about erasing emotions, it's about refusing to let them hijack your agency. Epictetus put it vividly, "You may weep inwardly, but let your hands do their work." Imagine a surgeon steadying their scalpel during a crisis, or a parent comforting a child while their own heart breaks. Detachment here isn't absence of feeling, it's presence of purpose. That's why Stoic journals are filled with raw admissions of anger, fear, and sadness, followed by a single question: what now? Here's where you can bring this into your life. Think of an emotion that's been holding you hostage lately, maybe resentment over an unfair situation, anxiety about the future, or even guilt from a past mistake. Instead of ignoring it or letting it consume you, try the Stoics' middle path. Write it down plainly. I feel this is valid, but it does not decide my next move. That small act of naming the emotion, then separating it from action, is where real freedom begins. Because here's the truth the Stoics knew: emotions are signals, not sentences. They're meant to inform you, not imprison you. So when Epictetus says, "It's not things that disturb us, but our judgments about them," he's handing you a key. The next time frustration flares or grief lingers, ask yourself, is this feeling a storm to weather, or a compass pointing me toward what needs attention? Detachment isn't a wall against life's blows. It's the art of standing firm while letting the wind pass through you. Let's bring Stoic journaling out of ancient scrolls and into your daily routine with prompts that cut through chaos like a razor. First, channel Musonius Rufus, whose lost journals were said to be filled with sharp self-inquiry. Try this. What did I try to control today that wasn't mine? Imagine Rufus in his Athenian classroom, urging students to distinguish between their sphere of influence and the distractions masquerading as duties. This prompt isn't about guilt, it's about awareness. Maybe you stressed over a colleague's tone or refreshed a weather app 10 times. Writing it down reveals how much mental real estate you're leasing to things you can't change. Next, borrow Marcus Aurelius' evening ritual with, where did I meet resistance today and how did I respond? The key here isn't to judge, it's to observe like a scientist studying reactions under pressure. Did traffic spark irritation? Did a cancelled plan trigger frustration? Marcus didn't flinch from these micro-tests. His journals show him dissecting them with clinical curiosity. The cucumber is bitter, throw it away, brambles in the path, step around them, he wrote. Your chaos isn't the problem, your reflexes are. For a third prompt, channel Epictetus' blunt wisdom. What's one story I'm telling myself that's amplifying this chaos? The Stoics knew suffering often comes not from events, but from the narratives we layer over them. That delayed flight isn't a personal attack, it's wind and mechanics. The snarky email isn't a referendum on your worth, it's someone else's bad day. Epictetus, who was crippled by a cruel master, wrote, men are disturbed not by things, but by the views they take of them. This prompt peels back the drama to reveal facts. Finally, try Seneca's sunrise question. What's one thing I can do today to align with my best self, regardless of external chaos? This shifts focus from what's happening to you to what's happening through you. Seneca would write this while gazing at the dawn, knowing even emperors couldn't control his integrity. Here's the challenge, pick one prompt this week. Write just a sentence or two. Stoic journals were famously compact, not diaries but drills. Rufus' lost notebooks likely held similar fragments, each a chisel strike shaping clarity from confusion. The goal isn't perfection, it's pattern recognition. Because when you spot the gap between reaction and response on paper, you start bridging it in life. To the Stoics, nature wasn't just scenery, it was the ultimate teacher of resilience. Picture Marcus Aurelius, camped along the Danube River during a brutal military campaign, pausing to write these words. Look at the trees, how they stand uncomplaining, even in winter. Observe the river, how it flows without resisting the rocks. In the midst of war, he found calm by aligning himself with nature's rhythms, where chaos wasn't an interruption but part of a grander pattern. Centuries later, science would catch up to his insight. Modern studies on forest bathing, the Japanese practice of Shinrin-yoku, show that time among trees lowers cortisol, boosts immunity, and sharpens focus. But the Stoics didn't need data to know this. They saw nature as a mirror, reflecting back the virtues they aspired to. The oak's steadfastness, the river's adaptability, the season's quiet acceptance of change. Cleans, the Stoic philosopher who carried water by night to support his studies, captured this reverence in his hymn to Zeus. All the universe, entangled in harmony, obeys your law. To him, even storms and earthquakes weren't disruptions but notes in a vast, ordered symphony. Imagine standing on a cliffside, watching waves crash against rocks. The Stoics would say the turmoil isn't chaos, it's the ocean being exactly what it's meant to be. That's the radical reframe. Your stressors, setbacks, and storms aren't flaws in the system, they are the system. So how do we borrow this lens today? Start small. Next time overwhelm hits, step outside not to escape chaos, but to witness it distilled into something wiser. Notice how the maple tree sheds leaves without regret to survive winter, or how ants rebuild shattered tunnels after rain. The Stoics called this sympatheia the interconnectedness of all things. Your rush hour traffic jam isn't so different from a flock of geese navigating crosswinds. Both are friction points in a larger flow. Marcus wrote, "Let your view of all things be like one who looks down from the highest mountains. From that vantage, even the messiest human struggles start to feel like weather patterns, temporary, natural, and part of a cycle far grander than ourselves." Here's the invitation. Instead of scrolling through stress, try Stoic forest bathing. Sit under a tree for 5 minutes and ask, what would this oak say about patience? Walk by water and observe how it moves around obstacles without resentment. Nature never resists reality, it embraces it, and that's the secret the Stoics etched into their journals. When you stop fighting the currents of chaos and start flowing with them, you don't lose control, you find it. Musonius Rufus wasn't just a philosopher, he was a man who turned exile into a classroom. Banished to the barren island of Jaros by Emperor Nero, he could have spent his days cursing his fate. Instead, he gathered students in the rocky dust, teaching Stoicism under the open sky. His surviving journal fragments reveal a mind unshaken by circumstance. Exile deprives a man of his city, not his humanity. Imagine that, stripped of status, home, even comfort, yet still finding purpose in the act of serving others. While Nero's Rome burned with decadence and paranoia, Rufus wrote, "The true philosopher is like a doctor. His job is to heal, even when the patient spits in his face." That's Stoicism in action, not abstract theory, but gritty, unwavering commitment to virtue when life feels anything but virtuous. Now shift the scene to modern chaos. Consider astronaut Scott Kelly spending a year aboard the International Space Station, where a single malfunction could mean catastrophe. His journals echo Rufus's spirit. You don't rise to the occasion in crisis, you fall back on your training. Or Dr. Rebecca Decker, an ER physician who documented her shifts during the early pandemic, writing, "Fear is the enemy of focus. My job isn't to feel calm, it's to act calmly." What links these figures across 2,000 years? The deliberate practice of aligning action with purpose, regardless of external turmoil. Rufus didn't just teach philosophy, he embodied it, turning his exile into proof that adversity could be a forge, not a furnace. Here's the thread that binds ancient and modern role models. They don't wait for calm to contribute. Rufus's lectures in exile weren't about grandstanding. They were about proving that philosophy isn't a luxury for peaceful times, but a lifeline in chaos. A fragment from his lost journals captures it. If you light a lamp in a storm, you don't blame the wind for flickering the flame, you shield it with your hand. That's the difference between those who crumble in crisis and those who clarify it. The lamp isn't just knowledge, it's the choice to share it when the world feels darkest. So who's your chaos-tested role model? Maybe it's a teacher who kept educating through personal loss, or a neighbor who organized aid after a disaster. The Stoics would urge you to study these figures not for hero worship, but for pattern recognition. What habits let them function when others freeze? Rufus's students recorded his daily ritual. Each morning he'd ask, "What's one thing I can do today that exile can't stop?" Not a grand goal, just a single, unblockable act. A modern parallel, journalist James Foley, imprisoned in Syria, secretly taught fellow captives English with a pebble on the cell floor, later writing, "They could take my pencil, but not my voice." The lesson isn't about suffering, it's about agency. Rufus's exile journals show him tending olive trees in cracked soil, not because they'd flourish, but because the act itself defied despair. Today's role models do the same. The nurse singing to dementia patients amid staffing shortages, the software engineer debugging code during blackouts. These aren't superhumans, they're practitioners of what Rufus called the art of necessary action. And that art starts with a question far more potent than, why me? Rufus's version, what now? Because in the end, chaos doesn't create character. It reveals the character you've already built, one small, steadfast choice at a time. Seneca's exile to Corsica should have broken him. Banished by Emperor Claudius on false charges, stripped of wealth and status, forced to live in a damp island hut. By all accounts, it was rock bottom. But his journals tell a different story. Instead of crumbling, he wrote, "This very place which others use as a punishment, I embrace as a retreat." Those years in exile became his most prolific period, producing philosophical letters that would outlive the empire that cast him out. Here's the twist: the isolation he could have resented became the space where his ideas crystallized. The obstacle, his banishment, wasn't just endured, it was alchemized into the very path forward. That's the core of the Stoic mantra: the obstacle is the way. Not as a platitude, but as a practical lens for turning setbacks into setups. Marcus Aurelius captured this same idea with a vivid metaphor: the emerald's shine requires friction. Think about that. A raw gemstone doesn't reveal its brilliance until it's ground against the wheel. The very process that could destroy it is what unlocks its radiance. Modern science echoes this ancient wisdom: muscles grow through micro-tears, forests regenerate after fires, and neural pathways strengthen when challenged. The Stoics were early observers of this universal law. Growth isn't just possible in adversity, it's often dependent on it. Now consider a modern parallel. Sarah Blakely, founder of Spanx, spent 2 years selling fax machines door to door while nursing a startup idea. When her prototypes were rejected by every hosiery manufacturer, she didn't scrap the concept. She hand-cut samples in her apartment, using rejection as proof she'd spotted a gap in the market. Her obstacle, an industry unwilling to innovate, became the fuel for a billion-dollar revolution. Like Seneca, she could have seen closed doors as failure. Instead, they were signposts pointing her toward a road less traveled. Here's where most of us stumble. We treat obstacles like stop signs rather than detour markers. A missed promotion becomes proof we're not good enough instead of a nudge toward a better fitting role. A creative block signals we're washed up rather than an invitation to dig deeper. The Stoics would say we've got it backward. Marcus wrote in his journal during a military campaign, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." He wasn't just calming himself, he was recognizing that barbarian invasions and supply shortages were sharpening his leadership in ways peace never could. So here's a challenge. Grab your journal and pick one recent setback, a rejection, a mistake, even a daily irritation like a traffic jam. Now ask, if this obstacle had to serve me, how might it? Maybe the rejected proposal forces you to refine your pitch. The argument with your partner highlights an unmet need worth addressing, even the spilled coffee. A chance to practice patience before a big meeting. The key isn't to pretend the obstacle doesn't hurt, but to interrogate it like a Stoic. What's this trying to teach me? Where's the hidden leverage point? Because here's the secret Seneca and Marcus knew. Obstacles don't just test us, they reveal us. The writer who journals through writer's block discovers reservoirs of discipline. The entrepreneur who pivots after failure spots opportunities others miss. Even nature agrees the oak tree that withstands fierce winds grows roots no calm day could inspire. So next time life grinds against you, remember, you're not being destroyed, you're being polished. The question isn't whether you'll face friction, but whether you'll let it make you shine. Marcus Aurelius ruled the Roman Empire at its most chaotic barbarian invasions at the borders, plague ravaging cities, political betrayals unfolding daily, yet he still carved out time each night to write in his journal. Not quick scribbles between meetings, but deep reflections on virtue, mortality, and the nature of control. How he treated time like a Stoic, not as something to manage, but as a finite resource to invest with ruthless intentionality. His famous line cuts through centuries of busyness. Your life is what your thoughts pay attention to, not your calendar, not your to-do list, your attention. While modern culture wears busy like a badge of honor, the Stoics saw busyness as a distraction from living. Consider the irony. Today's productivity hacks, time blocking, inbox zero, hustle culture often leave us more drained than fulfilled. We chase efficiency while losing sight of why we're working in the first place. Marcus faced literal wars, yet his journals show a man who refused to let urgency dictate worth. You could leave life right now, he wrote. Let that determine what you do and say and think. That's Stoic time management in a sentence, live as if today might be your last, not to panic but to clarify. Would you spend your final hours scrolling, complaining, or fretting over trivialities? Or would you, like Marcus, choose to focus on what echoes beyond the noise? Here's where modern chaos gets insidious. We mistake motion for progress, mistaking a packed schedule for a meaningful life. Seneca called this being busy to the point of emptiness. He observed wealthy Romans rushing to appointments, yet hurrying through life without living it. Sound familiar? The meeting marathons, the back-to-back notifications, the frantic multitasking that leaves us exhausted but unfulfilled. The Stoics would diagnose this as a focus crisis, not a time crisis. Marcus didn't have fewer demands than we do, he had sharper filters. His journal reveals a simple test for any task. Does this serve the common good? Does it align with my character? If I died tonight, would I regret spending time on this? Try this time audit drawn from Epictetus' teachings. For one day, track not just what you do, but what you give your attention to. Note the moments when stress hijacks your focus, the pointless argument, the obsessive refreshing of news feeds, the tasks that feel urgent but aren't yours to solve. Then ask, if today were my last, would this deserve a place in it? The goal isn't guilt but awareness. Marcus didn't journal to add another task, he journaled to subtract everything that didn't matter. So here's the challenge. What chaos is currently monopolizing your attention? Is it the drama of office politics, the illusion of keeping up, or the endless loop of what-ifs? The Stoics remind us that time isn't lost to big crises, but to 1,000 small distractions we mistake for obligations. Your empire, whether it's a business, a family, or a personal dream, won't crumble if you pause to ask, is this thought, this task, this worry worthy of my limited days? Because in the end, controlling your time isn't about doing more. It's about attending relentlessly to what makes the doing matter. We download apps to track our sleep, our steps, even our moods, as if quantifying life could somehow tame its chaos. The promise is seductive. Master your schedule, optimize your habits, hack your way to perfection. But here's the uncomfortable truth Seneca spotted 2,000 years ago. Being busy is a form of laziness of the soul. He watched wealthy Romans fill their days with appointments and errands, mistaking motion for meaning. Sound familiar? That calendar packed with back-to-back meetings, the productivity dashboard glowing with completed tasks. It feels like control, but it's often just a polished distraction from the questions that matter. Who am I when the apps go dark? What's left when the metrics fall away? One of the most startling entries in Marcus Aurelius' journal admits, I cannot control whether my child lives or dies, whether the plague spares my city, whether my advisors betray me. For a man who ruled the known world, that's a staggering confession of helplessness. Yet in that admission, he finds something unexpected: freedom. The universe is change, he writes. Life is opinion. Not resignation, clarity. The Stoics didn't journal to micromanage their lives. They journaled to confront the illusion that life could be micromanaged at all. Modern life twists this wisdom. We've swapped Seneca's busyness as avoidance for a new delusion that if we track enough data, we can outsmart uncertainty. The irony: the more we try to control external chaos, the more we amplify internal chaos. Research shows excessive productivity tracking spikes anxiety, not achievement. Those midnight scrolls through habit tracking apps, they're often just digital pacing, a way to feel in command while avoiding the void no app can fill. The raw, unquantifiable work of becoming who we're meant to be. So here's a challenge straight from the Stoic playbook. Delete one app today. Not the useless game you play on the subway, but the one that sells you the lie of total control. The sleep tracker turning rest into a scoreboard. The calendar that segments your day into colored blocks but leaves no space for spontaneity. The habit app shaming you for failing while ignoring the context of your humanity. Notice what arises in that absence: not chaos but space. Space to ask, as Seneca did each night, what part of today was truly lived, because no algorithm can answer that. Only your journal can. Stoicism often gets mislabeled as cold indifference, a philosophy for stone-faced warriors who suppress emotions. But crack open Marcus Aurelius's journals and you'll find something startlingly different. Amid the weight of empire, plague, and war, his most frequent reminders weren't about toughening up, they were about reaching out. When you wake reluctant to rise, he wrote, think, I'm waking to do the work of a human being. What complaint can I have if I'm going out to do what I was born to do, to serve others? This wasn't lofty idealism, it was gritty pragmatism. On days when grief for his dead children threatened to paralyze him, he'd force himself to visit hospitals. When advisors betrayed him, he'd note, the best revenge is not to be like them, then allocate funds to orphanages. The man who could have drowned in self-pity instead used his pain as fuel for compassion. Modern psychology calls this compassion fatigue, the exhaustion that comes from caring too much, especially in prolonged crises. Healthcare workers burning out during a pandemic, teachers drained by underfunded classrooms, even neighbors weary from helping each other through hardship. The Stoics anticipated this 2 millennia ago. Hierocles, another Stoic thinker, visualized care as concentric circles, the self at the center, then family, community, and humanity radiating outward. His radical idea: draw the circles inward, not by neglecting yourself, but by recognizing that serving others is self-care. When Marcus felt depleted, he didn't retreat, he'd write, what's one thing I can do today that exile, war, or plague cannot stop? Often it was small: a letter to a grieving friend, an extra ration order for soldiers. The act of giving didn't drain him, it grounded him. Here's where Stoic compassion defies modern stereotypes. It wasn't about martyrdom or unchecked empathy. Epictetus, who taught Stoicism to former slaves and emperors alike, warned, if you weep uncontrollably for another's suffering, you've doubled the tragedy. Stoic compassion meant clear-eyed service, helping without losing yourself. Imagine a firefighter rushing into a blaze. They feel the urgency, but panic would doom everyone. That's the balance the Stoics cultivated: deep concern paired with unshakable presence. So how does this translate when your world feels chaotic? Start with hierarchical circles. Your first duty is to keep your own lamp burning: sleep, nourishment, moments of stillness. But don't stop there. Draw the next circle closer: a text to a struggling friend, groceries for an elderly neighbor, even patience with a rude stranger who might be fighting invisible battles. Marcus wrote, "You don't have to turn the world upside down, just tip the scales toward good where you stand." Try this tonight in your journal. List one way you nurtured yourself today and one way you nudged the outer circles toward light. Not grand gestures, the Stoics prized consistency over heroics. Maybe you drank water when stressed, circle 1, then listened without judgment to a coworker's rant, circle 2. The paradox: in serving others amid your own storms, you don't lose control, you find it, because compassion, the Stoics showed, isn't a luxury for calm days. It's the anchor we grasp when the waves are tallest. Silence wasn't just an absence of noise to the Stoics, it was an active practice, a forge where clarity was hammered out. Marcus Aurelius, ruler of an empire that never slept, made a ritual of stealing moments alone at dawn. His journal entries often began with observations like, "At daybreak, when you struggle to rise, remember, this quiet is your birthright." Imagine him wrapping himself in a cloak before the palace stirred, using those hushed hours not for planning battles or drafting laws, but to interrogate his own thoughts. "Go into yourself," he wrote. "Nowhere will you find more peace than in your own soul if you can quiet the storm within." That last line cuts deep, because here's the irony. 2,000 years before noise-canceling headphones and meditation apps, the Stoics knew that true silence wasn't about blocking the world out. It was about turning the volume down on the chatter inside. Fast forward to today, where silence has become a relic. We drown solitude in podcasts, news loops, and the relentless ping of notifications, as if stillness were something to escape rather than cultivate. Epictetus saw this coming. "Guard your inner citadel as a fortress," he warned. "What enters without your permission owns you." Think about that next time you reflexively reach for your phone in an elevator or fill a quiet walk with audiobooks. The modern world treats silence like a vacuum to be filled, but the Stoics treated it as sacred space, a training ground for discernment. Without it, how can we hear our own judgments? Marcus put it bluntly, "If you seek truth, be silent first." So here's a challenge drawn straight from their scrolls. Try 5 minutes of intentional silence today. Not meditation with guided instructions, not background music, just you and the weight of your own thoughts. Sit by a window, walk without earbuds, or simply pause in your car before entering the house. Notice what arises: restlessness, boredom, a nagging to-do list. That discomfort is the point. The Stoics believed that what we avoid in silence reveals what controls us. Marcus called these quiet moments the mirror of the soul, where unresolved fears and unchecked desires rise to the surface. Now ask yourself, what chaos are you feeding by avoiding stillness? Maybe it's the anxiety that surfaces when the podcasts stop, or the unresolved argument that echoes louder in quiet. Epictetus would say that noise isn't just distraction, it's avoidance. And avoidance, as any Stoic knew, is where chaos breeds, because when we refuse to face our inner tumult, we outsource our peace to external noise. The solution isn't more control over the world's volume. It's building an inner citadel that stands firm, even in the quiet. Try this tonight in your journal. Jot down what bubbled up during those 5 silent minutes. Not to judge it, but to recognize it like a general surveying the battlefield before choosing tactics. Because silence, the Stoics showed, isn't retreat, it's reconnaissance. And what you discover there might just change how you meet the noise tomorrow. The Stoics had a secret weapon against despair that few people talk about: a sharp, unexpected sense of humor. Picture Musonius Rufus, banished to the barren island of Jaros, living in a flimsy tent battered by wind. When visitors pitied his conditions, he'd deadpan, "If you think this is small, you should see the palace Nero's building in my old villa." That wasn't just wit, it was defiance distilled into a laugh. Even Marcus Aurelius, shouldering the weight of an empire, scribbled self-deprecating lines in his journal. "Today I lost my temper like a child over spilled ink." Behold the philosopher king. These weren't slips of stoic seriousness, they were deliberate acts of levity, a way to cut tension with the blade of perspective. Modern science catches up to this ancient wisdom. Studies show laughter triggers endorphins, lowers cortisol, and even temporarily numbs physical pain like nature's reset button for stress. But the Stoics weren't just chasing feel-good chemicals. Their humor had teeth. Epictetus, who limped from a leg broken by his cruel master, taught students to mock their own fears. "You're afraid of poverty." Imagine wearing a ridiculous patchwork cloak and begging for figs. Survive that image and you'll survive the reality. The lesson: when you can laugh at the worst-case scenario, you rob it of its terror. Here's where Stoic humor differs from modern positivity. It wasn't about slapping a smile on suffering or toxic optimism. It was about spotting the absurdity in the struggle. Seneca, dying slowly from Nero's forced suicide, wrote letters joking about the incompetence of his executioner. Dark, absolutely, but that's the point when fate hands you chaos. Laughing at its clumsiness is the ultimate act of rebellion. So try this today. Scan your chaos for something ridiculous. Maybe it's the way your laptop crashes only before big presentations, or how your dog picks chaos moments to demand belly rubs. Write it down like Marcus would, not to dismiss the stress, but to frame it as a bizarre plot twist in your epic. Because sometimes the best way to regain control isn't to grit your teeth, but to crack a smile at life's imperfect script. Stoic journals reveal a surprising pattern. Entries about past regrets weren't endless loops of guilt, but deliberate ceremonies of release. Seneca, in his letters to Lucilius, called dwelling on mistakes time theft, stealing present moments to pay debts to the past. Picture him at his desk, candle flickering, writing about a failed investment or a harsh word spoken years prior. But here's the twist: he didn't just lament. He'd calculate the hours wasted replaying the event, then jot. To mourn an error is to add a second loss to the first. That ledger-like approach transformed regret from a feeling into a measurable cost, one he could choose to stop incurring. Modern psychology echoes this with studies on rumination, showing how replaying past events activates the brain's stress centers like a broken record. But while today's coping strategies often focus on processing pain, the Stoics practiced something radical: selective amnesia. Not denial, but a conscious decision, as Epictetus put it, to wish things had gone as they did. Imagine applying that to your own past. The job you didn't get, the relationship that soured, the insult you wish you'd answered differently. Epictetus would challenge: does revisiting it change the outcome? Or does it merely colonize your present? Here's where their journaling technique gets visceral. Seneca described burning old entries as a ritual, literally watching regrets turn to ash. The act wasn't about destruction, but transformation. Fire, to the Stoics, purified as much as it consumed. Try this. Write one past regret in detail. The heat of embarrassment, the weight of loss. Then light a match safely and watch the paper curl. As the flames rise, hear Epictetus' voice. You are not the person who lived that moment. You're the one who gets to choose whether it lives in you. The brilliance of this practice: it doesn't ask you to pretend the past didn't hurt. It simply asks whose voice narrates it now. Marcus Aurelius journaled about betrayal by allies, yet wrote, "The past is just a story." I hold the pen. Contrast that with modern habits: scrolling through old texts, replaying arguments in showers, or mentally rewriting endings that can't be changed. The Stoics would call this not reflection, but self-sabotage. So here's the question lurking under every burned page: what past chaos still rents space in your mind? Is it the criticism from a boss 5 years ago, or the childhood slight you still recount like a bedtime story? The Stoics dared to audit these mental tenets not with judgment, but with cold-eyed pragmatism. As Seneca wrote in a letter later found in Pompey's ashes, "No man steps into the same river twice, not because the river changes, but because he does." Whatever you're carrying from yesterday, ask yourself, is it a lesson or just weight? One belongs in your pack, the other belongs to the flames. Marcus Aurelius ended his days not with scrolls of state affairs, but with a simple leather-bound journal. In the flickering lamplight of his military tent, he'd revisit the day's events with clinical detachment. What harm did I witness? What virtue did I neglect? Where did I confuse what's mine to fix with what's not? No self-flagellation, no glowing self-praise, just an accounting as neutral as a physician's notes. This wasn't mere diary keeping, it was cognitive hygiene. By dissecting the day's chaos before sleep, he prevented unresolved thoughts from hijacking the night. Modern sleep science validates this ancient practice. Studies show that expressive writing before bed reduces cortisol spikes and improves sleep quality by up to 40%. Yet here's the paradox. While we track REM cycles with smart rings and drown in sleep podcasts, we've lost the Stoic art of mentally decluttering before rest. Our screens bathe us in blue light, sure, but worse. They flood our minds with unfinished narratives, comparison traps, and synthetic drama that no night mode can filter. Seneca saw this coming. "We are wild beasts in our bedrooms," he wrote to a friend plagued by insomnia. "We chase the day's phantoms instead of resting the soul." His prescription, a nightly audit simpler than any sleep app. Ask yourself 3 things. What did I learn today? What did I contribute? What would I do differently? Notice what's absent here: productivity metrics, calorie counts, or the performative gratitude lists of modern wellness culture. The Stoics weren't tallying wins and losses, they were separating signal from noise. When Marcus wrote, "The day is sufficient unto itself," he meant that sleep requires surrender not of responsibility, but of the illusion that today's unfinished business won't keep until dawn. Here's how to adapt their ritual for a world that never powers down. First, swap your phone for a notebook. The physical act of writing slows mental loops that typing accelerates. Next, divide the page into 3 sections. Observations, what actually happened, stripped of judgment. Lessons, not "I failed," but "next time I'll." And anchors, one concrete thing, a conversation, a bird's song that grounded you. This isn't about solving problems, it's about transferring them from your mind to paper where they can wait. Finish with Seneca's soul rest exercise. Visualize placing each concern in a wooden chest, whispering Epictetus' reminder. If it's not in your control, it's not yours to carry through the night. The test of this practice comes when real turmoil hits: a layoff, a breakup, a diagnosis. On those nights, the journal holds what the mind can't. Marcus's entry during the Antonine plague reads, "Today I saw death. Tomorrow I may meet it, but tonight I honor the space between." Not denial, but demarcation. A line drawn between the day's chaos and the night's sanctuary. Your bedroom isn't a war room. It's the one place where even emperors must lay down their crowns. So tonight, before you check tomorrow's weather or scroll through tomorrow's worries, try this. Write until your hand tires, then blow out the candle, literal or metaphorical, and let the ink hold what you no longer need to. Anger, to the Stoics, wasn't just an emotion, it was a failed investigation. Picture Marcus Aurelius mid-campaign, hearing reports of a senator's betrayal. The journal entry from that night reads not with fiery condemnation, but clinical detachment. Ask yourself at every moment, is this necessary? He dissects his own rage like a surgeon examining a tumor, probing its roots, weighing its cost. The betrayal stings, yes, but his real concern isn't the senator's actions. It's the fire they've lit in his chest. You could leave life right now, he writes. Let that determine what you do and say and think. In other words, is this anger worth a fragment of your finite existence? Seneca took this further in on anger, likening rage to brief insanity. His analogy cuts deep. Imagine watching someone in the throes of madness, screaming at a chair or punching a wall. Now recognize that's exactly how you look mid-outburst, convinced your fury is justified, blind to its absurdity. No plague has cost more lives, he wrote, describing anger as the emotion that burns down its own house to roast a pig. The Stoics weren't preaching suppression. They were advocating for something far more radical: curiosity. When anger flares, don't vent it or stuff it down. Interrogate it. Modern outrage culture thrives on the opposite reflex. Social media algorithms reward snap reactions. The hotter the take, the wider the reach. A study from the University of Pennsylvania found that tweets expressing moral outrage receive 6 times more shares than neutral posts. We've weaponized anger, turning it into a currency of belonging. But the Stoics would spot the trap. When outrage becomes habitual, we stop asking whether the cause merits the cost to our peace. Here's their antidote straight from the journals: the pause and probe technique. Next time anger surges, whether at a cutting remark or a news headline, freeze mid-reaction. Not to dismiss the feeling, but to dissect it with Marcus's surgical questions. What part of this is truly within my control? Is my response proportional? What virtue could this moment cultivate instead? The goal isn't to eliminate anger, but to expose its hidden assumptions. That driver who cut you off, did they wrong you? Or are you interpreting their haste as a personal slight? The co-worker's critique, is it truly unjust, or does it sting because part of you fears they're right? Epictetus offered a brutal litmus test. If someone handed you their body and said, "Do whatever you want with this," you'd be horrified. Yet you gladly let others hand you their opinions, and let those opinions steer your soul. Modern psychology confirms this insight. Studies show that labeling emotions, a technique called affect labeling, reduces amygdala activity by up to 30%. Naming your anger as "the story I'm telling about this situation" creates just enough distance to choose your next move. So here's the invitation lurking in Marcus's pages. What chaos within you deserves gentler examination? Not the external triggers, the messy house, the slow Wi-Fi, the political noise, but the internal narratives that transform annoyances into infernos. Because the Stoics discovered something counterintuitive: anger isn't the fire you must extinguish. It's the smoke alarm signaling where your boundaries or values feel trampled. The question isn't whether you'll feel it, but whether you'll let it cloud your vision, or use it as a spotlight, revealing what truly matters. Epictetus, born a slave and owning nothing but a wooden stool and a rough wool cloak, wrote some of history's most piercing words on wealth from his tiny rented room. Freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It's won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. His student Arian recorded him laughing as he said it, gesturing to the cracked clay walls around him. My riches. They fit right here. This wasn't poverty as deprivation, it was poverty as liberation. While Roman elites drowned in silks and banquets, Epictetus taught that true wealth lay in needing little, not accumulating much. His journal entries, scrawled by candlelight on borrowed parchment, read like a manifesto for mental clarity. The more you possess, the more that possesses you. A man chained to gold still drags chains. Fast forward to today's financial stress epidemic. Credit card debt soars while minimalist influencers preach capsule wardrobes and tiny homes. The contradiction is telling. We crave simplicity yet fear scarcity. Musonius Rufus, exiled to a barren island with only a single change of clothes, would recognize this tension. Luxury isn't just unnecessary, he wrote, it's a relentless taskmaster. Picture a Roman senator sweating over his vaults of jewels, just as we fret over mortgage rates and retirement accounts. The burden isn't the money itself, it's the mental real estate it occupies. Marcus Aurelius, despite his imperial treasury, journaled reminders like, how much time he gains who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does. The irony, the wealthiest man in the world envied the mental space of a peasant. Modern minimalism often misses the Stoics' core insight. Decluttering your closet or downsizing your home isn't the end goal, it's the means to reclaim attention. When Epictetus said, riches consist not in having great possessions but in having few wants, he wasn't advocating austerity for its own sake, he was mapping a path to focus. Think of your smartphone. Every app notification is a tiny demand on your attention, just as every unnecessary possession is a decision waiting to be made. The Stoics knew what neuroscience now confirms: decision fatigue erodes willpower. Every just-in-case item in your home, every subscription you rarely use, every outdated gadget gathering dust. They're not just physical clutter, they're cognitive leaks draining mental energy you could spend on what matters. Here's the challenge hiding in Musonius' scrolls. Remove one excess this week, not as punishment but as experiment. Maybe it's unsubscribing from promotional emails that fuel false needs, or clearing a single drawer of someday items. Notice what arises: restlessness. Fear of lacking, that's the frontier. The Stoics didn't preach minimalism to shame consumption, but to spotlight the quiet freedom beneath it. When Seneca gave away half his fortune to practice poverty, he journaled, "I thought I'd feel lack. Instead, I found space for thought, for breath, for mornings unburdened by inventory." So ask yourself, what's one weight you carry that doesn't serve your peace? Not just physical objects, but mental ones: the unused gym membership guilting you, the aspirational hobby supplies collecting dust, even the outdated self-image of who you should be. The Stoic secret isn't living with less, but waking up to what you've already outgrown. Because sometimes the richest life isn't about addition, it's about subtraction, revealing what was there all along. Marcus Aurelius kept a human skull on his desk, not as a morbid trophy, but as a daily tutor. You could leave life right now, he wrote in his journal, a reminder so blunt it stings even 2,000 years later. This wasn't macabre fixation, it was the Stoic practice of Memento Mori, Latin for remember you must die. Far from paralyzing him, this ritual sharpened his focus like a whetstone. While ruling an empire at war, he'd pause mid-strategy to reflect. Alexander the Great and his stable boy now lie equal in the dust. What then is truly worth my fleeting hours? The skull wasn't there to scare him, it was there to wake him. Modern culture treats death like a technical glitch, something to be fixed with enough medicine, yoga, or productivity hacks. We hide aging behind filters, outsource grieving to professionals, and speak of the deceased in hushed tones as if mortality were contagious. Contrast this with Seneca's letters, where he greets death like an old acquaintance. Life is long if you know how to use it. But most people squander it preparing to live. His words expose our silent bargain that we'll get to what matters after the promotion, after retirement, after the inbox is cleared. The Stoics would call this the ultimate self-deception. Death doesn't wait for your to-do list to thin. Here's where Memento Mori becomes revolutionary. When Epictetus told students to live as if on a mountain peak where every step could be your last, he wasn't stoking fear, he was offering a filter for triviality. Picture standing at that cliff's edge. Would you spend your final moments refreshing social media, arguing about politics, obsessing over a wrinkle or a missed workout? Or would you reach for your child's hand, write the letter you've postponed, or finally say, "I love you," without caveats? The Stoics didn't journal about death to depress themselves. They did it to distill life. Try this tonight. Borrow Marcus' practice. Write the date at the top of a page, then beneath it, "If today were my last," not as a hypothetical, but as a clarifying lens. List 3 things you do differently, not bucket list grandiosity, but the quiet corrections we delay. Maybe you'd skip the petty argument with your partner. Maybe you'd silence the phone during dinner, or perhaps you'd finally start that project you've dismissed as impractical. Seneca's version was even simpler. As you go to sleep, ask, "Did I live today? Or did I just prepare to live tomorrow?" The irony, avoiding thoughts of death doesn't prolong life, it dilutes it. A Stanford study found that terminally ill patients often report unexpected clarity, seeing trivial stresses melt away like fog in sunlight. The Stoics aimed to harvest that clarity before diagnosis. When Marcus wrote, "Think of yourself as dead. You have lived your life. Now take what's left and live it properly," he wasn't being grim. He was handing you a scalpel to cut through the bullshit. So here's the question lurking in every Stoic journal. What's one thing you're postponing that death won't? Not the trip to Bali or the novel you'll write someday, but the small, daily choices that are your life. The apology unspoken, the sunset ignored, the passion deferred. Because mortality isn't just an endpoint, it's the frame that makes the portrait meaningful. And the secret the Stoics knew: you don't need a skull on your desk to remember it. Just a pen, a page, and the courage to ask, if not now, when? Marcus Aurelius never thanked his teacher Rusticus with a public speech or a bronze statue. Instead, his gratitude lived in the quiet pages of his journal, where he called his mentor, "the one who taught me to endure labor without complaint, and to measure friendship not by numbers but by depth." In an empire where political alliances shifted like desert sands, the emperor reserved his fiercest loyalty for a man who demanded nothing but integrity. That's the Stoic paradox of friendship. It thrives not in the spotlight of grand gestures, but in the shadows of shared struggle. While modern metrics equate social capital with follower counts and LinkedIn connections, Marcus measured it in moments like this. Rusticus visiting his sick not with empty platitudes, but with a stack of philosophy scrolls, saying, "Even fever can't excuse you from the work of becoming human." Fast forward to today's loneliness epidemic, where the average person has hundreds of digital friends, but rarely experiences the raw vulnerability of a Rusticus-style bond. Studies show that despite being hyper-connected, nearly half of Americans report sometimes or always feeling alone. Epictetus foresaw this tension when he wrote, "Fortune tests friendships as fire tests gold." He wasn't talking about Instagram likes or group chats that dissolve when life gets messy. He meant the kind of relationship where someone shows up with groceries during your depression or tells you hard truths when you're veering off course. The Stoics would scroll through modern feeds and spot the irony. We've never had more tools for connection, yet we've never been more starved for the very thing Rusticus gave Marcus, the gift of uncomfortable presence. Consider the difference. When Marcus faced betrayal by political allies, he didn't post vague subtweets, he turned to his journal to dissect what Rusticus would advise. When Seneca's friend Lucilius grieved a loss, he didn't send a hollow "thoughts and prayers" DM. He penned a letter so intimate it still read 2 millennia later. "I am not soothing you. I am sharing your wound." Contrast that with today's performative support, the birthday posts crafted for audiences rather than the birthday person. the condolence messages copied from Google searches. The Stoics didn't confuse visibility with intimacy. As Epictetus warned, a crowd of casual acquaintances is like dining on painted fruit. It fills your vision but never your hunger. Here's where their journals become unexpectedly urgent. Buried in Marcus's musings on leadership and Seneca's letters on grief is a blueprint for friendship that chaos can't erode. First, the Stoics practiced what psychologists now call situational vulnerability, not oversharing for catharsis, but strategic honesty that invites reciprocity. When Marcus wrote, "Rusticus saw my shame when I failed, yet stayed," he described the antidote to modern loneliness being known in your stumbles. Second, they prioritized necessary friction. Unlike today's ghosting culture, Stoic friends leaned into conflict as a refining fire. Seneca praised a friend who argued with me until dawn, not to win, but to weed error from my soul. Lastly, they built what Epictetus called anchors of character, a friends chosen not for utility or charm, but for their ability to reflect your best self back to you. So here's your challenge straight from those weathered scrolls. Identify one person who's been your rusticus. Maybe it's the coworker who covered your shifts during your divorce, the sibling who calls out your excuses, or the friend who remembers your dead parents' birthday decades later. This week, break the modern script. Don't just text them, write a note by hand detailing one specific moment their presence steadied you. Not "thanks for being there," but "remember that Tuesday in the hospital parking lot when you said." That's when I knew I wouldn't drown, because the Stoics discovered a truth we've forgotten. In a world of endless connections, real friendship isn't about widening the circle. It's about deepening the ground beneath someone's feet, so when chaos comes, as it always does, they never stand alone. Digital overload isn't a modern invention, it's just the latest version of an ancient problem. Seneca, writing to his friend Lucilius, complained about the distractions of first-century Rome. People are frugal in guarding their personal property, but as soon as it comes to squandering time, they are most wasteful. Replace chariot races and gossipy dinner parties with TikTok scrolls and push notifications, and his words feel startlingly current. The Stoics didn't have smartphones, but they understood the corrosive effect of what Seneca called scattered attention, the mental equivalent of trying to fill a leaky bucket. His solution, a daily retreat into what he termed the inner citadel, a mental space fortified against the chaos of external demands. For us, that citadel might start with something as simple as reclaiming a single phone-free hour with nothing but pen and paper. There's a reason Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations in a private journal rather than on public scrolls. An uncluttered mind, he believed, required an uncluttered process. Throw out your wandering thoughts. Stay within the present moment. Imagine him in his imperial tent, deliberately setting aside the weight of empire to confront his own mind without filters or performance. That's what modern digital spaces steal from us, the raw, unfiltered encounter with our own thoughts before they're packaged for likes or algorithms. Research from the University of Virginia found that people would rather self-administer electric shocks than sit alone with their thoughts for 15 minutes. The Stoics would nod knowingly. We've outsourced our inner lives to the dopamine hits of endless content. Here's where ancient journaling becomes a radical act of resistance. Unlike digital notes that sync across devices, handwritten pages force slowness. The physicality matters, the drag of ink, the weight of the paper, the irreversibility of each stroke. Marcus didn't have a backspace key to erase his doubts or edit his vulnerabilities. His journal was a mirror, not a curated feed. Modern studies reveal what the Stoics knew instinctively. Writing by hand engages the brain differently, activating memory and emotional processing in ways typing can't match. When you journal like a Stoic, you're not just recording thoughts, you're conducting what Seneca called the day's autopsy, dissecting experiences to extract wisdom. The challenge isn't to abandon technology, but to carve out one sacred space where it doesn't intrude. Designate a corner of your home, a chair, a windowsill, even a closet floor, as your modern Stoic cell. No screens, no alerts, just you and the blank page. Start with Seneca's razor-sharp prompt. What part of today's chaos was truly necessary, not to judge but to discern? The flicker of anxiety when you couldn't check your phone, the compulsive scroll through work emails at dinner, these aren't just habits, they're windows into what Epictetus called the slavery of unnecessary desires. What unfolds in that screen-free space might surprise you. Without the constant ping of notifications, the mind begins to untangle the difference between urgency and importance. Marcus described this clarity as seeing each thing for what it is, its nature stripped bare. Your phone's buzz feels urgent, your child's laughter is important. The meeting reminder shouts, the quiet walk at dusk whispers. The Stoics weren't anti-technology, they were pro-attention. And in a world where the average person touches their phone 2,600 times a day, reclaiming even one uninterrupted hour becomes an act of rebellion. So tonight, try this. Power down your devices an hour before bed. Not airplane mode, not silent, off. Light a candle if you like, echoing the lamplight of Marcus's tent. Write just 3 sentences, one observation about the day's chaos, one lesson it revealed, and one anchor, a small moment of beauty or connection that outlasted the noise. The goal isn't volume or eloquence, but what the Stoics called hypomnemata, the art of remembering what matters, because the quietest hour of your day might just become the one that speaks the loudest. Chaos hasn't changed in 2,000 years, but our ability to meet it has. Those weathered pages of ancient Stoic journals weren't just personal musings. They were battle plans for the mind, proving again and again that control isn't about commanding the storm, but adjusting your sails. Marcus Aurelius wrestling with grief in his tent, Seneca facing exile with a pen in hand, Epictetus turning a slave's chains into lessons on freedom. What unites them isn't immunity to suffering, but the relentless practice of returning to one question: what's mine to shape here? That's the thread running through every ink-stained page, reflection as rebellion, not passive acceptance, but active engagement with whatever life hurls your way. Think of it like this: a dancer follows the music, but a wrestler transforms resistance into leverage. That's why Marcus closed his meditations with that visceral line: the art of living is more like wrestling than dancing. He didn't mean life is a brutal slog, he meant true strength comes from working with friction, not avoiding it. Every time he wrote about betrayal, plague, or war, he wasn't just venting. He was training himself to find the pivot points where struggle becomes fuel. And here's the secret hidden in his journal's final pages. You don't need an empire's burdens to start practicing that same alchemy. Your chaos might look different: a flooded inbox, a strained relationship, the dizzying pace of a world that never sleeps, but the Stoic tools remain unchanged. A blank page, a willing mind, the courage to ask, what did I let steer me today? That's why these ancient journals still speak to us. They're not relics, they're mirrors. When Marcus scribbled, "You have power over your mind, not outside events," he wasn't offering a mantra for calm. He was handing you a chisel to carve agency out of overwhelm. So here's the invitation: steal a page from their playbook. Not tomorrow, not when life calms down, but tonight. Grab any notebook, the back of a receipt, a spare napkin, it doesn't matter, and write one line. Not a novel, not a masterpiece, just a single observation. Today I wasted energy worrying about, or I handled better than I expected. That's how it begins. No filters, no audience, just you and the raw material of your days. The Stoics didn't journal to be perfect, they journaled to be present, and that's the real takeaway. Resilience isn't built in grand gestures, but in the quiet accumulation of small, honest moments. This isn't about fixing chaos. It's about befriending it, recognizing, as those ancient pages show, that the mess is where the growth happens. If you're hungry for more of this timeless wisdom, hit subscribe. Not because Stoicism holds all the answers, but because it offers something better, a compass for the storms we all navigate. The journals of Marcus, Seneca, and Epictetus weren't written for emperors or philosophers. They were written for anyone willing to pick up a pen and ask, what if this struggle is the start of something stronger? Your story, like theirs, is still being written. One